I'm just really excited today that we have Beau Beery with us. Beau is a best selling author on the book called Multifamily Investor That Dominates, right?
That's right.
I pronounced the title right.
Yep.
It's a book that I personally have read and made a huge impact in my pursuit of deals.
That's great.
In our Phoenix market over here. And, thank you to Beau. Like last year, we've closed the 6 deals in our hot Phoenix, Houston market. That's probably totally about 1,200 units added
Nice.
to our portfolio. So definitely really excited to have you over here with me today, Beau.
Well, congratulations. That's nice acquisitions for a year. Really good. Good job.
Yeah. And then we're ready for more to double this year.
Hey.
Awesome. So a lot of my investors and students also kind of wondering, well, how do I actually find deals? This is actually in the track of syndication is the most difficult topic because, raising money, I think it's a little bit relatively easy, especially in this capital market. You have friends and families that may have some extra capital, and that's usually how people kind of started. However, finding a deal is really difficult. And I've heard even a lot of our students were talking about, well, we go into the market and then like I took them on my tour. They're just like, the conversation I have with my broker is just not the same. It's awesome, but it also feels away because you have such a deep connection with your broker already. So how can we, the small fish, to actually get the deals in the market? So we kind of wanted to really address these questions in our webinar today, and who else is best to share the wisdom than Beau? So Beau, we're going to ask some questions over here. Can you give us like a little bit background on who you are and how did you thought about the idea of writing the book?
Yeah, sure. My background is I have a marketing degree and a master's degree in real estate from the University of Florida. I then went and worked for a company in North Central Florida that developed and bought and sold office, retail, industrial, and multifamily. I brokered and managed the portfolio for about 10 years. And then I had the opportunity to acquire a Coldwell Banker and a Coldwell Banker commercial franchise. And I exclusively just did multifamily brokerage. Had an awesome career there. I was in the top 5 in the world every year. I was #1 in Florida every year. And then I sold back my franchises back to my partners. And then this year I just kind of created my own little boutique multifamily brokerage firm. I've had a commercial real estate coach for a long time. He's Blaine Strickland. He's been a mentor of mine for quite some time. And for years, he was pushing me to write a book because I've spent 20 years in brokerage following some of the most elite guys in the world and just having a really cool, unique inside opportunity to see the best of the best and how they transact, but then also see like the average person or the guy who sucks, right? And the things they do wrong, and you can see the sharp contrast. So I started tracking these almost like numerically and writing down how they're made up and how they operate, how they turn in contracts, how they source deals, how they participate during a transaction, how they act afterward. And finally, Blaine convinced me, just, take 90 days of your life, 120 days of your life and go at it and just get this thing done. And that's what I did. And I wrote it in 90 days. That part was easy. It was, getting it published and the artwork and Amazon and all this craziness. But I'm really happy with the result. It's everything that I've ever wanted to pass on to an investor, both new investor and very seasoned investors, on how things actually operate, how they're done on the inside, what the conversations are between a broker and a seller as buyers are turning in offers.
Yeah. And then I would say the book is definitely unique. And I don't know how I stumbled upon it. I think Amazon probably referenced it. I have no idea where that came from. But then when I read the book, it's a very short read. And I think it's a very down to the point in terms of that. So in your book, you talked about how average investors are doing wrong. Like, can you list some of the things that you're just like cringe? You're like, oh, I know how that should be interactive, but And then guys, like it's probably some stuff that you have done before. And then I'll name my the one thing that I kind of take away from that whole chapter.
Yeah, I would say I would say just in general, in terms of like finding deals and doing things wrong, is most folks don't understand that, particularly the larger the asset, above 10 units, especially above 20, 30, 40 units, those investors are sophisticated people, right? I mean, they're pretty smart, they're pretty wealthy, they probably don't have to work a whole lot in their lives as they get richer and richer. And so, because of that, they also know that those assets are very special and that everybody in the world wants them. And so when you have that mentality, why would you entertain an offer from some random person that calls you directly and you sell for some sort of discount, right? Which people call off market. Over 90% of investors in the larger apartment world are calling brokers because they know they can procure 15 offers, elevate the price, and sell it for top dollar, right? Now, so I would say one of the biggest fallacies I see is that a lot of these training companies and syndications, they talk about how to write a letter directly to the seller, how do you make a phone call to the seller, how you procure these assets. And that's fine and dandy. If you've got several staff members in a company and you can dedicate one or two juniors to make those calls, I still encourage that. That's all good. But I wouldn't make, if you're the main principal or the main person, or you're a small company, or you're the one doing all the acquisitions, just looking at time efficiency, your time is much better spent just concentrating on building broker relationships, right? It's just an efficiency thing. It's just an efficiency thing. When I follow these elite guys, that's all they do. Right. None of them are like trying to do some deal directly with a seller. They know that's going to be difficult from a time horizon. All they do is making phone calls and develop relationships with all the brokers in their markets. Diving down, on things that I cringe about. There's all different.
I wanted to kind of chime in there. I love this. Actually was a question I wrote down because I thought you're going to go somewhere else. And then I wrote it down. I was like, is it worthwhile to get deal directly? Guys, don't get deals directly. When you get into multifamily, I would have to say, like, I've actually interviewed several people who are doing acquisition before. And their one advice is, brokers are doing the same thing you guys are doing, except they have years of relationship. They bought and sold it in the market. So you dialing like for dollar, which is when you transition from single family homes into these multifamily homes. This is the people like, oh, the same thing works for single family, it's going to work for multifamily, but it's not the most efficient use of your time, just like what you said, because your brokers are probably like contacted 10, 20, 30, 50 people like in that whole day for you. So it's 1 to 50 versus, like you have to directly dial all that. Yeah.
Well, and there's also you're first of all, you're exactly right. We're over the course of a 20-year career, I've been calling the same 998 people that own every single apartment complex in the northern half of Florida. I know who their husbands and wives are. I know who their kids are, where they went to school. I know what their hobbies are. I know how many kids they have. I know what makes them tick, what that doesn't. I know how they turn in. I know everything about these guys over the course, right? And so by using a broker, also, the more you transact with these folks, the more they want to bring you deals, right? It's like this, you don't just use brokers because brokers have relationships. You use brokers because the more you can build that relationship, the more deals you're going to see. And this business is all about how many times you can get it back. That's all it is. Almost everybody is pretty good at underwriting, managing, renovating, financing. Like those are things you can learn, right? Some are a little bit better than others, but no one has some tremendous advantage over another in any one of those things, like to where they would just be superhumans. What their superhumans are about is they just see way more deals than the average person, right? So if I showed you an Excel spreadsheet of every closing that happened in 2021 in the markets you cover, and there were 100 of them on there, and you went down that list and you only knew about 6 or 7 of them, you suck. Yeah. You're not doing it right, right? Yeah. And the thing you're not doing is you're not networking with the brokers. You're not developing your reputation. You're not in social media commenting and being active, You're not doing newsletters. There's all kinds of things you do to put yourself out there, but all of it's done so that you're aware of every deal that comes to market. There's nothing worse than seeing a deal that closed like down the street where you may even own something and you've never heard about it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think
by the time something hits a website, there's already lots of buyers. Okay.
Right.
No, this is not single family. In single family, every house is sold on the internet. Like that's how it's done. In multifamily, 0 apartment complexes are sold on a website. The only reason you see it on a website is because either a real estate investment trust has to tell their investors it's being exposed everywhere, or you have an uneducated seller who thinks that an apartment complex is sold on the internet. And so we as a broker put it on there just to satisfy the seller thinking we're covering all the bases. But every deal is sold by making phone calls and emails directly off our database.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's interesting. I picked up some insight over there too. So why does people list on LoopNet from broker perspective? My thought it was always LoopNet is a deal to go die, but it's probably a lead generation tool for the broker as well. Is that why deals?
I mean, number one, it is seriously, number one, it is to satisfy the seller. That's it. I mean, the people who trade the most often, they know that it's not going to get sold on LoopNet. We put on LoopNet so that, the mom and pop who owns 20 units, all they know is LoopNet. And if they don't see it on LoopNet, they think the broker is not doing their job. Right. And we're not going to spend our time trying to convince them, hey, by the way, nothing trades on LoopNet. LoopNet is great for retail and selling localized offices, industrial, all those things. Great. Right. But investment properties are so popular and so sought after, to put it on LoopNet for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to come after that you don't know and don't know whether to qualify doesn't make any sense. Right. Now, yes, some folks will put on LoopNet just to collect names, right? I mean, it's always good to build a broker database and add names and email addresses and phone numbers. That's all good, no problem. Sometimes if a smaller broker doesn't have a great CRM or an ability to catch all this information, putting on LoopNet. LoopNet also has these deal rooms so you can upload documents to, and sometimes just an easy way to store things so that you can send to buyers if they don't already have that. But other than that, it's all done phone calls and emails directly to folks. Got it.
And then now in your chapter, you also talked about, actually, let's kind of rewind back a little bit more. So what would you say the best way of practice? And then you talked about this in your book too. So guys, go read Beau's book, but what would you say, like a quick 5 minutes advice on someone who's just getting into a competitive market? First of all, should they select a competitive market as their target market for new investor? Or should they try to find out, you talk about criteria. Should they try to actually start with a secondary market to establish their track record and then get it into that primary market? So Phoenix, for example, it's a very hot market. We're established over there ourselves. We're very lucky. But we started when Phoenix was taking off, right? So now people ask me, like, how do I actually get into this market? So should you even look at that, or should you look at Tucson instead? Because it's maybe a less competitive market, establish yourself. And once you have track record, then move to the prime market. What do you think?
So here's my answer. It's none of the above, in my opinion. So it depends on what you're after. What I've done in my business is, in the brokerage business, which is the same thing that you as the investor should do, is I have exported from the property appraiser websites every apartment complex that exists over 10 units. The reason you on this call want to do this is because if you're someone who buys or can afford only 10 to 50 unit complexes, and the primary market you live in, 80% of the sales are 200 units or more, and there's only 5 or 6 sales a year between 10 and 50, why are you playing in that playground? Right? Okay. So you have to do an audit of every market within a 2 or 3 hour period, or whatever you're willing to drive. I think it should be under 3 hours, because you drive there for 3 hours, you spend 2 or 3 hours in it, and you drive 3 hours back, you can be home in time for dinner, right? So I would audit every market. And what I mean by is export all the assets. When you export the assets, it'll show when it last sold, what it sold for, right? Then you can look at, okay, how many sales and the type of asset I buy sold this year, and how many sold last year, and how many sold the year before. And you can start seeing the trends. And so there could be a market that has a whole bunch of 10 to 50 unit deals, but if they never trade in the trailing 5 years, again, that's not another one you want to concentrate on. But to answer your question, you want to cover as many markets as you can master, right? So you have to be able to be encyclopedic about every market you cover, not just, I'm going to cover Phoenix because it's a hot market. You need to know how much inventory is there, what percentage of assets trade per year. What's the average size units? What's the average age? What are the good submarkets, the bad submarkets, the demographics? I should be able to ask you all kinds of questions. I should be able to ask you all the questions that are on my website for my markets about your markets. And so you only want to cover the number of markets you can master. You can't just say, I want to cover the Southeastern United States. Well, if it's just you and a partner, there's no way you can master that many markets. Beau Beery can only master the northern half of Florida, which is about 8 or 10 markets, which are there. Some of them are primary, some are secondary, some are even tertiary, right? But the main driver is, what kind of deal do I buy? Let's find out how many actually exist in the market, and then how many of those are trading per year. So if you've got across 6 markets that you look at, and you've got 800 assets that are conventional between 10 and 50 units, and what I have found is roughly 7 or 8% of inventory trades per year. So that would mean there were 56 sales of that kind of asset per year. Then you got to ask yourself, okay, if there's only 56 sales, right? So that's 5 a month. Do I think I can capture one of those, right? How many tens of thousands of people are after those 56 sales? And by the way, that number probably ain't that far off. In the entire northern half of Florida, there's only like a dozen deals done a month in the entire northern half of Florida, over 10 units.
Right.
Not even 10 to 50 or 100 plus, over 10 units.
Wow.
So most folks don't even know how small number of deals they are. Because what happens is, at least if people go on LinkedIn, and everyone's connected to other people on LinkedIn, because everyone hangs out with the same people, and we're all real estate people. But what happens is you see closings here and there and here and there, and you see a due diligence walkthrough, and you see a before and after picture, and you see all this stuff. What your mind doesn't understand what's happening is these are closings that are happening all over the country.
Right.
But in any one market, there's a very few number of sales.
Right.
So you have to cover enough markets that has enough closings that you believe you could capture a market share to close on the number of deals you want to close in a month.
Yeah, no wonder I always feel like my investor always asks me, they're like, why are you not in Florida? Why are you not? I'm like, guys, I don't have enough time to even cover my Texas and the Phoenix.
And you have to be able to master. I mean, when I bring you a deal as a broker, if you're spending the first 2 weeks going, what are the demographics? What are the rents? How much does it cost for construction costs there? What's your labor look like? You're already done. I've already got 15 offers in 2 weeks.
Right.
You have to, I mean, the guys who are winning this stuff, they know immediately, as soon as I send it to them, oh yeah, I know exactly what I can rent that for post renos. I know what my property manager can lease that for. I know what the renovation costs are going to be. I know what I'm going to sell that for in 3 years. They know this stuff.
Right. So as a person who is kind of just getting into the market, and where do you download that report? You said it was appraiser report.
Every tax assessor website has every single property that exists. Gotcha. Now I know that there are some states that are not, call it show me states. Texas. In other words, they privatize everything.
Yeah.
So then I believe you can call them directly and pay for this information.
Okay.
If not, then you may have to subscribe to like a CoStar or a Reese or something. And those are expensive, but it's worth it. Yeah. I always go property appraiser, because property appraiser has every single property that exists, because they want to tax you. Whereas other websites like CoStar, Reese, and other websites, they don't capture as many as they should. Right. And then the information is entered in by 20-year-old people who don't do real estate.
And they're a quarter to 6 months late. And then in a dynamic market, for example, like a Phoenix, where price is going up 25K every single quarter, like the sales comps can just not be used over there. Yeah, that's awesome. So back to when the investor first come to the market. So I think if you did this study and you actually talked to both, let's just say tomorrow a new person comes in the North Florida market and be like, hey, I'm interested in buying properties over here, right?
Yeah.
So if you were someone who doesn't have existing transaction track records, if you have transaction track record at the market, you're kind of starting with a little bit of higher totem, like on the totem with you probably. But still not the same as a home field advantage. But if you like a brand new, you're like, oh, I want to get into it. If they did these homework, then you'll be like, wow, I'm really impressed with it. I may spend a little bit more time talking with them, right? So what should they do to kind of get
I mean, beginning people, and I've said this on a bunch of different podcasts, and beginners may not like it, but it's just a fact, right? And this is not, don't take this as coming from a broker, because you're not necessarily trying to impress the broker. You're trying to impress the seller that the broker is going to be representing. The broker is just the intermediary. And so if all of you put your seller hat on, what does a seller want? A seller wants someone who's successful, who owns units, who has lots of equity, who has debt relationships, who has maybe even done deals with my listing broker, who knows people in the debt world that I could call up the debt people and say, hey, have you done a deal with this guy? He said he has. How was it to deal with him? Like, they want experience. They want the highest probability of you closing, right? So if you're a beginner, the worst thing you can do is call up and say, I'm a beginner. I don't own any units. I have hardly any money. I'm from a different market. I'm just new to your market. I'd love to give you my criteria and have you bring me something.
Yeah.
I mean, do you hear that? You hear that? I mean, I'm trying to make it sound more insane.
I made these mistakes before. Yes.
but that is exactly what it feels like in my head or any broker's head. What you have to do is link up with a mentor. You have to you have to get partnered up with someone who owns units. It doesn't even matter if it's not in the market you're calling on. As long as you own units in other places, you have money together, you have debt relationships, you have other broker relationships. So someone would partner up with Elisa and they call me and say, hey, we have XYZ Company LLC. We're out of Phoenix, Arizona. We own 1,200 units there. We're looking to expand into the Florida market. And by the way, the person who's calling may not have anything, but we're talking as a team, right? Now you've got my attention, right? Now you're someone who I know when I send you a listing and you turn in an offer, I can talk to the seller and say, hey, this lady Elisa, she did a great program over in Phoenix, or Elisa and John had this great program in Phoenix. They're good players. They've accumulated all these assets in the last 2 years. They seem to be closers. I like the way they work. I like the way they underwrite. That's a whole different story. You turn in an offer as a new person. I don't care how high the price is, how small the due diligence period is. When my conversation with the seller is, I don't know who they are. Like, they just came to me. They don't own any other assets. I've asked them that. They didn't tell me where they get their debt, when they get their equity from. They didn't really have any debt relationships yet. They're going to have to go for those during due diligence period. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I have to thank, I think I'm going to write thank letter to all my brokers who give me a chance in the beginning of my career. Because after breaking on this, if you did talk to a broker that is willing to kind of take you on, I think, what does that say about the broker potentially?
Well, and let me qualify this, because this is super important. And you make a great point. The world I'm talking about are the larger stuff, right? As soon as you get over 10 units, and particularly over 20 units, everything I just told you is correct. If you're starting out and you're buying triplexes, duplexes, quadruplexes, eightplexes, which I strongly encourage, that is a whole different world. I'm not in that world, but I know that world is still majority controlled by brokers now. But this time it's residential brokers, and residential brokers are handholders, right? They're used to selling houses, and then maybe 5% of the transactions they do are a quadruplex or duplex. And you don't have to say, I own all these units. It helps, but they're used to hand holding and they want someone who can close on it. And I think that's a great place to start. And I still think that your whole game should be finding out who those residential brokers are that do sell these apartments, because most residential brokers just concentrate on a certain type of house and that's it. And then there are the ones who do investment property and sell houses. You can call up your local realtor organization or the MLS, and you can have them export who the top 10 or 20 brokers or residential agents are that sell the most number of under 10 unit deals. They have this information. Okay.
Yeah.
And then that's who you want to call and start networking with, or the top 50, whatever, depending on how the size of your market is. But it still works the same. It's just the residential realtors, they're not as savvy to ask, where do you get your equity, your debt? How many units do you own? Who'd you close with? What brokers have you done transactions? What sellers have you done transactions with? What kind of renovations do you do? How many deals have you bought and sold in the last 5 years? I'm doing that because I know my seller wants it, right? Whereas people who own triplexes, quadruplexes, most of them only own 1 or 2 of those, and they were newer themselves, or they inherited or whatever. So they don't know to ask those questions. So they don't care to have that information from their broker.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and also, how should you interact with brokers? So now you're in. So somehow your resume or the broker feels sorry for you that they got you in their database, they sent you some deals, right? How should you be acting in order to kind of move up, get it into broker's mind? In terms of like the deal flows, and when they have a deal, they're like, oh, so and so maybe. Yeah.
So before you make any of these calls at all, let's say you found your mentor, you've hooked up, you guys have formalized a relationship, maybe you put together an LLC, an operating agreement, you put some money in, you guys are now working together. And before you make your first phone call as a newbie, I would again make a list of every single broker that exists in the market, every one of them. I mean, Google them. Go to the major websites of Cushman & Wakefield, Colliers, Coldwell Banker, NAI, all these brokerages, export their names, import their names and contact information to a CRM. And I would research each broker thoroughly, meaning find out their social media profiles, find out what their background picture is, find out where they went to school on LinkedIn, find out who you know together on LinkedIn, export their picture and put it in your CRM so you know what they look like. Are they old, young, race and background and all this stuff? Like formulate kind of a who this person is, right? And get to know them. Find articles they've written, articles about them, deals they've sold. So that when you go to make that first phone call, you're not going to download all this information on them. They would be freaked out.
Right.
But your first phone call is, hey, I'm so-and-so, we own so-and-so. Here's my qualifications. By the way, when I was trying to find your contact information, I found you on LinkedIn. I see you and I know George together. Oh, let me tell you a story about George real quick. Right.
Yeah.
Or, hey, when I was looking at your contact information, I saw on Facebook, your background picture had a Mustang GTO on it. I'm big into cars, right?
Yeah.
Just a little something to get in there. Right. Yeah. And then as conversations progress over time, the CRM will allow you to take notes. You start learning more about each other, who your kids are, who you're married to, what you do on the weekend. And so then when you're calling, what you're trying to do is you're trying to add value to the broker. So you're telling them maybe about that closing that you did recently, or you're telling them about an amenity that works really well on your property, or you're telling them about how rents are doing in your market. Just something that gives them value. You talk about business a little bit. Hey, Beau, do you have anything that I can make an offer on? What are you working on these days? Hey, by the way, how'd your race go over the weekend? Right. So you're just trying to build relationships, not because you want something from them, but because this is going to be a 20, 30, 40-year game, right? You might as well become friends. You might as well build the kind of relationship that you want to have for the next 20 to 40 years. And every good broker works on what they call their rank A customers, right? So there's 998 people that own all the assets in my market. I do 79% of my transactions with about 144 of them. That's my rank A people. It's the 80-20 rule, right? Yeah. So those are the people who routinely are returning my phone calls, my emails. They make good offers. They close on deals. They don't ruin their reputation. They don't retrade deals. All the things that go into a good working and personal relationship. These are the folks that consistently are in my world. And I spend all my time serving those people. Now, a rank B and C person I might be able to do a deal with, but they're not in love with me as much as I'm in love with them. Right. And the same thing, what happens with investors is, unfortunately, investors spend 80% of their time with the top 20% producing brokers. But there's another 80% of brokers who do office and retail and industrial, and then they do 3 or 4 multifamily transactions. That's why when you're building this broker list, you want to put every broker down, even the ones you don't like, even the ones you don't think you would ever have a bond with or whatever. Like, if you could imagine if there were 48 not so great productive multifamily brokers in your markets, but you called them and touched base with them every 30 to 60 days over a 5 and 10 year period, even if you don't like them and you don't jive, do you think you could produce 1 or 2 deals in a 10-year period from 48 unproductive brokers?
Probably. Yeah.
I would think so. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
If you made 7 figures from it in 20 years,
Yeah.
was it worth having 40 times 12 months a year times 30 years? Was it worth that many hours of conversations for just $1 million?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, what's the dollar per hour on that? It's pretty freaking high.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then, so for people who are already drenched in the market, this is a question for myself.
Right.
And so then, does the strategy then change? Because I'm like, well, I can't possibly call every single broker because every conversation I have with my broker is very valuable. An hour with my broker is going to give me leads for 5, 6, 7, 8 deals, right? I don't possibly can't close all of them, and I have to choose the ones that I like to pick. Good position, good problem to be having. So I found myself not having enough time to start working with brokers in the whole market. So that in that case, should I just work with, I know you talked about in the book, so later, well, should I just work with one set of broker that keeps on bringing me the deal, and then just so that happens, they're the top producers in the market? What do you think about that?
Never. I mean, you should definitely keep that as a good focus. If you guys are interacting a lot and doing lots of deals, keep that relationship up. But the only way you can maintain this many relationships is by making the full list, importing in your CRM. And then what you do is you're adding 3 or 4 calls per day. And what happens is over a 45 to 60 day period, you are cycling through all 60, 70, 80 brokers. Okay. If you try to call them all in a few days, that is, of course, overwhelming. But when I walk into my office, that's how I have my system set up, is I only have 3 to 5 calls a day. That's it. Like, I can go home, I can go play pickleball after 11 a.m. if I want, as long as I got a hold of all my investors. And I talk to my 3 to 5 guys and I built that relationship. That's my whole game. And when you're calling them, you know, you're not going to, I mean, not all of them are going to have deals. It's not going to happen. All you're doing is you're adding value to them. You're talking a little bit about business and things that are happening in the market. I mean, these are 3 to 5 minute calls. These are just, you know, as you get closer relationship, it's a shorter phone call because you guys know each other so well, right? Yeah. Well, all you're doing is you're just staying top of mind. That's all it is. Yeah. You know, because what you want is you're only as good as your last phone call, right? So when you could have talked to someone, you know, 45 days ago, and you had a great phone call and you meshed and you bonded and talking about those things, and he gets a listing. Well, the people who he's thinking about the most are the ones who have called him the most or called him most recently. Right. So that's why you have to have that cadence of every 30 to 60 days, right? And as long as you have that, I promise it's not overwhelming. If you just break it up into by days, it's no problem. But I think you should definitely, and listen, you can have your favorites. You should have your favorites. I have my favorites. I have 144 favorites, right? And you should have your favorite brokers, and you should spend more time in those phone calls. You may be talking to those people every 2 to 4 weeks, just organically without even having to schedule it. Yeah. But you're going to forget the other 80% if you don't make them a priority. Right. Right. And I know this because everyone, I mean, so many investors are doing what you just said, which is they're just concentrating on us guys who are the most successful. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have phone calls with my broker every 3 days. That's good. That's good. Because we're on a friends basis now, right? So that's great. If your broker is giving you the best advice, he should be telling you to talk to as many brokers as possible, because you're in this for procurement. I mean, to try to rely on 1 or 2 brokers for your living is ridiculous in this market. Right. And I know that. I would love for everybody to just use me, but it's not reasonable. Right.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I think just learned something over there myself too, and then I probably should call some old friends as well. But anyway, so basically, let's talk about transaction a little bit more. So, what are some your most memorable customers, and what did they do that made you remember them? Even like you said, hey, I'm only on top of mind in the last 40 days, like who I talked to, like last week who I talked to. But there are a few people who is on your mind that just kind of left a lasting memory. So what did they do kind of like made an impression in your memory so that among all the short memories
I have two really good recent ones that these are folks I've done lots of deals with and lots of business with, and these are two separate situations that just kind of sort of they back up the type of people they are. And I'm going to tell you these two stories, and I don't mean them to be, hey, this is what you should do for brokers. It's more about this is the kind of relationship that over time you want to build because they're very fruitful back and forth, right? One of them just happened on Sunday. So on Sunday, one of the investors that I do business with called me up. They were actually on the way to a wedding. And they said, Beau, this 12-unit deal just popped up on realtor.com, right? I mean, we just talked about how, no deals are ever sold on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And so this was a little transaction I was actually trying to list for 8 years. And the sellers didn't call me, called a residential realtor who's never sold an apartment ever, as far as I could tell, but they had a good relationship. That's the power of relationship, right? And so they put on realtor.com and this investor called me and said, this listing just popped up. And I looked up, I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I've been after this freaking listing for 8 years. Are you kidding me? Right. Yeah. And so long story short, they said, hey, we'd love for you to represent us. Like, let's turn an offer. This is on Sunday. They're on their way to wedding. Yeah. I mean, in 2 hours, we had a fully executed contract. Now, they could have easily called that broker directly, said, hey, we're such and such. We'd like to turn in an offer. And it happens to be, they probably wouldn't have gotten it because they were already negotiating 2 offers. But because I had a name in that market, that broker gave me the courtesy, and he believed me when I told him that I'm working with a heavy hitter and that we're about to bring within a couple of hours a heavy hitter offer and that the seller should hold off. And I was able, because of my name in the market, to tell the broker, hey, tell your seller it's Beau Beery. Okay. And so I tell you this because that buyer brought me in on a deal that I'm going to make 40 or 50 grand on, and he didn't have to do that. Right? Wonderful. Now that broker was probably going to get paid all the commission anyway. Now we're working out something between us.
Gotcha.
That's one thing, right? And the buyer did that for 2 reasons. Number one, he knew that because I've been in the market for so long, I could probably get them that deal. But number two, he also knows now I owe him something.
Yeah.
Like I want to do things for this person. And we do that anyway. I mean, I send them business a lot, right? Yeah. But like now it's even more. It's like, okay, you just did this for me. Like I can't wait to do something for him.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The other deal is a little more high level. So I've done 6 or 7 transactions with an investor, and he was working on a deal in Jacksonville. It's about 140 units. And when he bought it, I said, hey, man, I'd love to work on that one on the back end, because he actually happened to buy that. There was no broker involved on that one. It was a very rare deal. And so I said, man, I'd love to work. And he's like, man, you got it. He said, in 2 years, when I got this done, done deal. Right. So, about a year goes by, and he starts getting some offers from other brokers, like really good ones. Yeah. And he called me up and he said, Beau, he said, listen, he said, you and I talked and I was going to give you this listing. He said, but let me tell you the offer I just got on this thing. And he told me the offer, and I'm like, whoa, like, dude, you got to take that. He's like, but Beau, listen, we talked about it. I was going to give you the listing. You were going to get paid X. I want to make sure we're good. I'm like, dude, we're good. Like, you've got to take that. You always take care of me. I know we're going to do more deals together. Take that. Right. So I gave him the right advice. You should take that. Yeah. So about 45 days, I think it was 45 days later after it closed, he sends me a commission check.
Oh, wow.
Now, it wasn't for the full amount, he wasn't like paying double commission, but it was not a token amount. I mean, I could have bought a damn car with the check.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's nice.
And it was just out of the blue, just showed up in FedEx. I had no idea it was coming. Open it up. I'm like, what the hell is this? I read the memo. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, do you think that on every single deal that I ever list, who's one of the first human beings I ever think of?
These two people, right? Because right now you just said, hey, there's these two people. I just talked about them and they're clearly on top of your mind.
Listen, this was a $15-20 million deal. So to him, to cut me that check is really nothing as a percentage. But the gesture. The gesture and what it's going to pay him back. I mean, it's already paid him back. We just did another deal together. I sold a huge deal for him.
Right.
We had a ton of money. And so it's stuff like that, like take care of people, right? Take care of your own people too. Take care of your staff. I mean, I've learned so much from elite investors about the way they treat their staff and their partners. Like it's incredible how they share and pass out major bonuses and great salaries to keep people and make them part of the deal. And so to lose someone phenomenal in this business is really, really painful.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love how you just said there. It's interesting. I want to kind of refer to this other book. We kind of have a reference that we did interview too from Bob Berg. You probably know Bob Berg himself. I think The Go Giver. I think a lot of your books, when you kind of read through the basics, I mean, there is nuances that you definitely pick up from there, because just getting into the broker's mind, how they think about it, is going to make you a lot more elite investor. But also basic principle wise, it comes down to like being a value giver, like really kind of giving value to your brokers. And that's how, and it's really basic of how you build relationship in general. But there's definitely nuances in the books I pick up in terms of that.
You have to understand, brokers, we get calls all day, every day, emails, social media, phone calls, texts, constantly. And over 90% of them are, hey, Beau, what do you got for me to buy?
Right.
That's it. Like it was just, hey, Beau, what do you got for me to buy? Anything I can look at, right? We never, there's no personal connection. There's no value at all. Like, I mean, they didn't give me anything, right? All I do my whole career is try to add value so that people think of me when they go to list. It would be super unique. And those investors stand out the most who add value. And I gave some examples. It could be, like I said, talk about closings, talk about amenities, talk about rents that have increased, talk about things you're doing to be more efficient, talk about things you're doing to lower expenses. You went to a convention and heard something cool. Tell me about it. Right. You took some notes from some podcast you went on. Send me the notes. You had some questions. You want my opinion? Like, do stuff that like helps us help you. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Especially tax advisors, right? Like for brokers.
Right. Really make you stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of talked about commission and how the seller should behave, because seller become buyers at some point. And how does that kind of give you a little bit more edge as well? So I want to kind of talk about a little bit more of a personal story over here where, I listened to your sessions about commissions. Like, first of all, broker gets paid by commissions. They don't get paid from any other way, right? Usually, except for that big check that comes. It's also a matter of commission. So, you have families and all that stuff, and you have feed, and then that's areas of where we should focus on. So what do you talk, and I know you talked about this in your book too, but I want to share our audience here.
Sure.
When to make a deal work, sometimes broker will offer cutting their commission. And by doing so, you make the deal work for your investor, that transaction happens. So how should the buyer or the seller react to that? Because the deal is a deal. There's a number that kind of works. Therefore, the transaction can happen, especially on the buyer side. How should that kind of make fair?
So I mean, it's very, very rare in which you have a signed listing agreement, an agreed upon commission, you're in a deal, something comes up in the deal, and then either the buyer or the seller suggests, in order to make this thing work, the broker should come off their commissions. It's really quite rare, especially the larger the asset, because the players involved know that it's such a small, tiny portion of the overall deal. And that by doing that to the person who procured the deal for you or who brought you the buyer isn't going to help long term, right? Like, brokers are human beings, sellers are human beings, buyers are human beings. People remember that stuff, right? Yeah. And who am I going to bring deals to? The person who beats me up every time or the person who never beats me up?
Right. Yeah.
It's super simple, right? Yeah. And so when you're in a transaction, I guess to answer your question, when you're in a transaction, if you are involved in a deal in which any portion of a broker's commission is literally the deal breaker or not, I promise you shouldn't be buying that deal. But because it's such a tiny amount that if you're doing a deal that's literally within 2 or 3% of being profitable for you, you're a terrible investor. Right. Now, let me talk about the other side. Absolutely, I've done it myself. When there's, when a seller has to concess to a buyer for some reason, something came up, and a buyer has to feel some pain. In certain situations, I do think it's not because it's going to make or break the deal, but because maybe the broker should feel some of that pain too. Yeah. Right. Like, but it should always be proportionate, right? That's the biggest storyline here. So for instance, like an example in the book, if you have a $20 million deal, okay, and let's say you have a $200,000 commission, right? And the buyer has asked the seller to come down 5%, $1 million, right? So if you go to the broker and say, hey, listing broker, I'll come off 900 grand. I need you to come off 100, right? Well, so that means that, that whatever 100,000 is divided by $20 million. I mean, what is that, like 1%?
Yeah, it's still tiny.
Right?
It's around here.
But he's asking me to come down 50%. And I had nothing to do with the pipe that burst or the survey issue or the title issue or nothing, right? Yeah. That would be where any human brain, the broker's brain, would be like, if that's where we are, okay, all right, I'll remember that. Yeah. Let's see how many deals you ever see from me again. Right. So if they cost him tens of millions of dollars over the next 20 years, he'll never see another deal. Yeah. Now, I gave you an extreme example. That never happens to that extreme, right? But my point is that, I think brokers in certain situations, they're not pigs. They're going to do what they can to make a deal work for everybody. I think most brokers, just again, as a human being, ask to be treated fairly and proportionate. Right. And you want to do so just because you want to be able to leave that transaction as a buyer or seller with total reputation and respect in hand. So that you can continue to do deals together. You should be asking yourself, how do I handle this situation? So when I walk away from it, the buyer and or seller and the broker still love me and can't wait to send me another deal. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. Keep that in mind. It's like all these situations we come up with. If you just think about how would I want to be treated? How are these people going to think of me? What is that? How is a way I can get out of this and still be in love? Right, absolutely. And I think that chapter really kind of changed it because, I did have a broker that offered a commission waive just to make the deal work. I was on the buyer side, right? Because certain numbers doesn't work. It's just like, well, the number doesn't work. I can't buy this deal. And they're like, what if we come up the commission with this and then make the deal work? Because we've had this inventory for a very long time and we know it's a deal. And then that will make the number work. So in that case, I just took it, thank it, and that's it. Never thought a lot more about it. Later on, when another situation happened with my own personal problem, because we have investors' money too, that's fiduciary responsibility. Right. So when I had my own personal property, when this happened again after I read your book, what I made sure is that deal makes sense. And then he, like another broker, he volunteered, basically waived his commission on like just a small portion of it. Yeah. And I was like, well, actually, for this deal that makes sense, but for this other deal that I'm going to buy on the buying side, because I'm going to sell it 1031 exchange it to it on the buying side,
I'm going to pay you more on that because that deal has enough money to make it up.
And that's, I've certainly done deals like that. Like sometimes there are really small profits by a seller, or that we're doing a quick turnaround time.
Right.
And here's the thing, the smaller the deal, the more often brokers' commission could have an impact. I mean, if you're buying a $400,000 quadruplex, that broker's probably making 25 or 30 grand. And so sometimes 5 or 10 grand may make a difference, right? I mean, and that could be a difference. I guess it's possible. As the bigger the deal gets, the percentages are much smaller.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you do a $20 million deal, I mean, listen,
so
every
like
commission is done differently. It's like a point to 2 points. I mean, it gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore becomes less and less of an impact at all.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I would just use those situations as a way to build your reputation, not to get that extra 0.1 in rate of return.
Right.
See, here's the deal. In that situation right there, Elisa, let's say he gave up 20 of his $40,000 or 20 of his $60,000. Okay. In your IRR and your cash on cash, I bet that didn't move 1 point. I bet you literally, if you went into your pro forma and added 20 grand to $1.2 million that you bought it for, whatever, it literally didn't go up probably didn't go up a half a point.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so when you think in 5 years, when you go to sell that now for 1.9 instead of 1.2, and you start to think about the fact that you just made 700 grand and you made that broker give up 20 grand, instead of, you could have said, absolutely not. You have done your job here. You done a great job. I love working with you. I want you to keep bringing me deals. That could have sparked a few more transactions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how you want to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's kind of like how the second case when I did that, and then later on, because I have a very close relationship with this broker, one thing he brought up and just unsolicited was like, when this happened, like you made it right with us, it's 25 grand doesn't really mean a lot. By the way, the deal sold was really small, but so it makes it some different. But he's like, but by offering that, it made it right for me. I remembered it. So that made you stand out from everybody else over there. I'm like, great. Thanks to Beau's book. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Beau, for all these great information. I would have just sit here and talked with you for 5 hours if I could. But unfortunately, I know you're a busy man. You got to be somewhere else. We really appreciate you being here. And now I wanted to kind of have our listener check out your book. Kind of once again, how do they get in contact with you? How do they consume more of the best content that you have produced over there as well?
Yeah, thank you. 3 ways to do it. First of all, this is what the book looks like. It's called Multifamily Investors Who Dominate. It's in hardcover on Amazon. It's on Audible. I'm the one reading it. It's on Kindle. It's various forms. Great book, totally an inside look of how these deals are done and how you get deals to come to you instead of always having to chase them. The second way to reach me is if you go to my website, beaubeery.com, and my name is spelled there in the little lower corner, BeauBeery. And whether you are in the Florida market or not, the reason you want to visit my website is because I want you to go to the landing page and scroll down. Look at all the stats I have. Go to the resources section at the top. I have templates, cover pages, letter of intents, and then you'll see all the markets I cover. And the reason you want to visit those markets, whether you buy them or not, I want you to see the kind of stats I track. Those are the stats you want to master for your markets. And if you can master that stuff, I'm telling you, people will notice you right away. Yeah. And the third way is I highly recommend you subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's called Beau Knows Multifamily. I have playlists for beginners. I have playlists for advanced level. I have playlists for brokers. And I don't do fluffy stuff. I mean, these are anywhere from 3 to 10-minute videos, most of them. And I'm giving you like, here's what you do in this situation. Here are terms you never put in a contract. Here are things you never say to a seller or a broker. Here's what you do to win a deal. Like I literally have a process of here's how you win deals. That's awesome. It.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And guys, like if this is definitely a book that you should not miss. Honestly, like I think I've never read a book that is really making an impact in terms of deal and getting behind the broker mindset. So highly recommend it. Definitely order a copy for yourself. And I didn't, I know you have YouTube channels, etc. I'll definitely spend some time listening to that as well. Thank you so much for sessions today.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome.